I
go
think
ahead.
it's interesting in that, you know, the kind of the powers that be that I talk about, you guys go into a lot of detail about the ancient powers and civilizations and the catastrophes and cataclysms. And a lot of people just don't understand what that means, the time scales, the advanced civilizations. And
Right.
I think what I'm bringing with this science is another kind of artifact in the form of a science that's 32,000 years old, but it's a fully blown out axiomatic unified field theory that explains all conundrums in physics today. So it really makes you think and puts a kind of a strong foundation under things that may be less provable from an artifact. You know, how did they get these stones to mate up so precisely? You know, well, if you understand the nature's wheelwork, you understand acoustics and resonance, and you kind of melt stone and transform it, then things start to fall into place. Well, maybe that, you know, actually did happen and people knew how to do that. So I think hopefully it adds to the story that we're all trying to tell.
Yeah, it certainly seems to me like what I've seen in the last few decades is several strands of research and paradigm shifts and breakthroughs and understanding that seem to kind of be converging onto a common area. There's an overlap there. What do you call it? It's almost like a Venn diagram. And there's this overlap area. Now what you've shown me, Dan, like, okay, it looks like this has been a potent move in that direction that's been indicated from multiple sources. But maybe without coming to the definitive conclusions, it would allow us to actually bring it forth, resurrect it, and utilize it. Because that's where I'm coming from, is that when you say that maybe they knew this and they could actually utilize it, that's what I'm interested in. Of course, the theory that has to precede the theoricus has to precede the practicus, but ultimately it's the practical that really intrigues me. Like, could we actually resurrect this science and use it in the 21st century to make this world a better place? And I think the answer is yes.
Well, it has, and the gentleman who kind of decoded it over the last 30 years was a naval architect, and so he's an engineer at heart, and he not only goes over the theories, but he was about to actually license technology for we'll call it over unity generator. You know, you sit it on your desktop, but it went from 100 watts to 100 megawatts, and that's the kind of technology that he was going to bring out. And then he passed away last March.
Oh, really?
And so, yeah, so he does a lot of papers, not just on the research, but on the technology. So you could have the levitation and propulsion and power generation in addition to the mind. So he's very practical in nature, but it's the underpinning. It's more than theory, it's applied. So if you could go back and look at any of the technologies, so the Teslas or the Cooks or the Adams and the Keeleys, you now have another, let's call it glasses, that allow you to focus on explaining what's going on. When a tinkerer or a Tesla invented something, it was more intuitively done and they couldn't always explain it. But now all of that can be explained, including some of the remote viewing and some of those technologies too. They all now have a basis in reality. So it's very exciting. But if you think about what that means in terms of changing or upsetting the apple cart, it's the #1 national security, for example, that kind of power and propulsion. And so there's a big push to suppress it. And so if everybody knew that science, then that would kind of unwind a lot of things that people would rather have just remain the status quo. So Malcolm Bendall's technology, for example, or Schauberger's technology, all of those now have a basis in solid physics that's explainable. So it's a very powerful tool, I think.
And I think there has been interest in suppressing it. Malcolm's strategy is to open source everything. So they're licensing applications, but as far as the basic principles and the theory behind it and all of that, he's putting everything out there. And that's what you find that's constantly being updated on the strikefoundation.earth website. Looking into it, I'm not convinced that all of it is 100% valid, because, I've always been kind of trying to balance that, that position of being open-minded, but also being skeptical enough that you're not going to fall for anything that comes and is thrown your way. And because, I'm at the age where, I've seen plenty of stuff and claims and things over the decades that didn't amount to anything in the end. So, as I learn more though, and I see the correlations, I'm just like really immersing myself into Schauberger's work now to try to see, and I'm already beginning to see the parallels there between Malcolm and now what you're presenting me seems to be further confirmation that we're really looking at something real here and not just, somebody's, that they've concocted in their minds and convinced themselves that it's valid. And, I've talked to people who really were believers in various, various scenarios and various systems of belief that in my mind just don't pan out over the long term. And I won't get into the specifics, but, you've seen them too. So at this point, what I'm seeing is, yes, the evidence here looks overwhelming that it's legitimate. Does that mean, like, as far as like, and I haven't absorbed your work yet, Dan, to the point where I would even presume to have any kind of an opinion one way or another on it. Although saying that what I'm seeing there seems to confirm a lot of the other things that I've seen. So therefore, my first reaction to it is very positive and like, okay, obviously I gotta know more here. I gotta go through this again, however many times it takes to absorb it. But, I've heard so much, from Malcolm, and I know that okay, here's what I've seen, what's verified. Well, the retrofits of internal combustion engines, whether they're gasoline, diesel, kerosene, generators. I've seen, the videos now from 5 different sources, independently tested. And I suppose somebody could claim, and I think somebody says, well, videos can be, they can be, whatever, they can be manufactured, that, but, here's the thing, if you've got a group in Tasmania, you got another group in London, you got another shop up in Alaska. Where was the third one? The fourth one. I've forgotten where the fourth one was. Okay. They're all showing. And so what they've done is they've hooked up Bosch analyzers to a variety. In one case is an internal combustion. In another case, it's a diesel engine. In another case, it was, maybe they did a natural gas. I'm trying to remember now. I need to review those. But the point is that they're all showing similar results as far as the effluents coming out of, the internal combustion engine. The video shows the 3 guys standing there. I suppose the 2 guys the mechanics that built the engine, did the retrofit. And then, so the video is going, they start the generator. Actually, it was the one I'm thinking of as a generator. They've got the analyzer on it. The generator warms up. You can see the hydrocarbons, in parts per million. You can see the carbon monoxide in terms of a percentage. And so the camera would go right on the analyzer as they would successfully turn on the technology and then turn it off. So the technology is not on, and you see the carbon monoxide, I think, going up to about 245, 300 parts per million. Maybe it was more than that. I don't remember the exact numbers. The hydrocarbons are going up. Turn the technology on, and they zero out. Turn the technology off, they start climbing again. And I've seen this on 3 different videos now. So I'm going, okay, now let's work from the assumption these are not faked. Then this really can Oh, and then it show, they also, the readout shows that what's coming out of the tailpipes are basically oxygen. So, okay, it looks like this is legitimate, but now can we use this for space propulsion? Okay, so there's a huge leap there. So we can prove this, but now can we claim with 100% certainty that this can be used for propulsion of spacecraft? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know enough yet to have an opinion on this matter. But clearly my next phase of my education is to learn a whole lot more about this and how it may connect with what I've been studying in terms of the sacred geometry, its connection with architecture and with astronomy and with the time cycles of Earth history and things like that. It's one thing to be studying it from that dimension, and I'll say, okay, now I'm going to get into this. But of course, the connection here between the what I've been looking at and this technology is to me, I guess, the idea that these numbers represent frequencies. Is that what you would think when I start looking at these canon of, I guess I could call it sacred numbers that recur over and over and over again in our measurements of time and space, and various manifestations thereof? Are we talking about frequency? It seems to me when I see some of those same numbers showing up in some of the varied musical scales, and in the ratios of the various colors, the Fraunhofer lines and so forth, suggest to me, yes, we got to be looking at frequencies.
Yeah, I think what you said right at the beginning is important, is that there's kind of a convergence here. And to me, what's important about what you're doing with Malcolm Bendall, what Stephen Greer's doing with his the lost century technology, what I'm doing, bring the science out, is that there's a healthy discussion out there that can't be just dismissed as craziness. There's something there. Whenever you hear anybody talk about it, the proof is in the pudding. So getting the real technology is important. But there's been examples, hundreds of examples over history of people coming up with this. And I think the important thing that's going to happen in 2023 is that there's going to be a public discussion of this kind of technology and these kind of sciences. And so the good news is, when you ask about frequencies, is that nature has one law of interaction, and that law of interaction is scale invariant. And so anywhere from the quark on up to the galaxy, what you're talking about a frequency. So if you see what we call an atom or a galaxy, nature's always balanced. And so you're talking about angular momentum, things spinning around, and at the edge of whatever that thing is, the quark or the galaxy, is balanced with space around it. And so if you look at a planet, the size of the planet and its orbital speed and its rotational speed at that edge, for that mass at that radius, it always equals what we call c, or the speed of light. And so that's the constant out there. Think of it as a carrier wave for spectrum. There'd be a similar one for seismic, similar one for acoustic. So the seismic is interior to the horizon or the edge, and the acoustic would be just on the boundary, and then the free space would be on the edge. But you always balance at that same constant c. And so that's where the frequency. So you can take, if you look up spherical stacking, when you go from the background substratum to hydrogen, that's the first polarized space spherical thing. But then it builds up and you get all the elements, and it's very predictable how you do it. So when you look at really what hydrogen is, and oxygen and carbon, which is all the things you just talked about in Malcolm's experiment, when you really look at how those things work, they're interfaces to this sea of energy. And then the water acts like a dielectric or capacitor. So its ability to take on and store latent heat, that's really angular momentum stored in there. And so you can walk through all of those chemicals and those processes, and there's resonance. So if you think about really what a catalyst is, like palladium and some of the in your muffler system, and you're trying to clean the fumes coming out of internal combustion engine, there's a thing called catalysts. And what catalysts do, they are resonance. And so they will go in there, and just a few parts per million can totally change a chemical process because of the resonance. You talked about music. I can't remember the title, but it was the German one, in the late 1800s. And it's called the musical fugue, but it basically explains the source of musics, and the fifths and the three and the fifths. Those are the same ratios you'll see on the permeability or the permeativity of free space. So there's so much involved with that. If you look at Keeley, he was doing the same thing, exploiting the resonances. So all of this stuff comes together. So when you see a number that is a calendar year, that's another way of describing the time it takes to do speed around some circumference. And so the frequencies, rotational speeds, those all get tied together, and they always have this common thread of equal at their edges, the background, which we call the speed of light, but it's really not the speed of light. So with my deck I'll explain, and the Sedona Earth Origins is how that works. And that's the first example that I break down. And then if you think about what that constant is, it has to do with phi, what we call golden ratio. So the speed of light is tied to that. So everything in nature is tied to that time constant, which 1 over x, we'll call x the golden ratio. That is a simultaneous change increment, and that equals 1 plus x, which is the sequential. And that is the fundamental reveal on the law of nature's wheelwork. So all of these things come together. So I think when we tell this story collectively, and the Greers and the Malcolms and the Randall Carlsons come out, and we talk about the science that goes with it, it's just going to be something people can't ignore. I think it'll be pretty powerful.
I believe you're right there, Dan. I think it's going to be, at this point, it's going to be impossible to put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, and I think that we can get the message out there, and I think we can state it clearly. And it's extremely exciting, the fact that we can put those threads together, both the threads back in time and history, the fact that civilizations were interrupted, and there were very advanced knowledge that were, miraculously has survived, and that we did know how to do things in the past, much more advanced than we're doing them now, and that people need to kind of open their minds and their aperture of what they're thinking about, what the art of the possible actually is. And it's very exciting. And so I'm really looking forward to 2023. I think it's going to be a good year.
I do too. We just need to somehow scale back the international tensions somehow. That's going to be a factor in my mind, that I don't like that trend, that where we're going in that direction. But, I think that this and understanding these technologies could help alleviate the problems, the frictions, because for one thing, I think a lot of what this is coming about, even like, the geopolitical strategies of our own country, is essentially who's going to dominate the zero-sum global resources. Who's going to get to control the minerals, the ores, the hydrocarbons, who's going to get to decide. And I think, our foreign policy is pretty much all based on that motivation, even, apparently there's a very large oil deposit under eastern Ukraine, for example. And what role does that play into us trying to recruit Ukraine into NATO? And the idea that, that Russia is very reluctant to sign on to the whole New World Order thing, that really does seem real, and not just the delusions of conspiracy theorists. There really does seem to be utilizing, whether it's the virus or whether it's climate crisis or whatever it might be, that's being employed as a tool to bring about, I think, a greater level of control on a global scale. I think that's really part of the agenda here. But if it can be proven or demonstrated that we can shift over to a whole different system of energy, like in Malcolm's work, there's still a role for fossil fuels. Fossil fuels, because you have to get to the requisite temperatures to create the plasmas first. Once you've created the plasmas, then they can be self-perpetuating. But you got to ramp up the high energy levels to affect that complete disassociation of electron and neutron to the point where it can now become conductive. And once that's done, then it's self-sustaining. So you still have a role for fossil fuels, but if the fossil fuel consumption gets reduced by 85 or 90%, we're basically solved the problem, because now there's actually, for one, on the climate change front, there's absolutely no restriction on the biosphere from easily absorbing that volume of hydrocarbons being injected into the atmosphere. So that problem is basically solved. You don't have to go to zero fossil fuel use in order to prevent climate change, right? If you reduce the fossil fuel use by an extraordinary amount, which looks feasible using these kinds of alternative energies, well, now we've gone a long way towards solving that, and we can, like, okay, we don't need to worry about that anymore. We can take all our brain power and put it onto other problems, right? Secondly, the idea that we're basically in this conflict, that there's only finite resources, and that it's going to come down to this kind of Malthusian competition for these ever dwindling resources, that pretty much goes away. There's something else. Now, I haven't vetted this, so I cannot speak with any authority at all on it, and haven't looked at it. But one of the things Malcolm says about the ability of the plasmoids, and supposedly, now he's told me this, and again, I'm taking everything with a grain of salt, but I will say this: some of the things that sound initially outlandish that I've had an opportunity to vet have checked out. Now, I have not vetted this claim, but he's told us that he was brought in as a consultant on the BP oil spill. And he was able to sort of clandestinely use a type of technological application of the plasmoids that he was only just beginning to study back then, which was using the plasmoids to convert hydrocarbons to protein. And whoever was it, the EPA wouldn't let him use his technology. And what he did was he hired a fleet of fishing boats and that dumped their waste, their sewage into the ocean. And they started dumping these plasmoid charged waters down in. And he said that the reaction was that it began to convert the hydrocarbons to proteins, which were then consumed by the algae, and there was algal blooms, and then the algae was being consumed by fish. And it was interesting. He did say, well, you'll notice if you go back and look, which I did look this far, it was this big crisis for a while, a few months, and then it just kind of went away, didn't it? Just went away. Well, because
you've covered a lot of ground there. I'm glad you brought up that. So when I started pulling the thread on the science and discovered it and figured out, well, why wasn't I taught this? That's when I started researching, the powers that be. So the powers that be you mentioned there at the beginning were the current ones. And so I've done a lot of research, 10, 15 years on that too. So there's two sciences that I really promote. And one is the science of sovereignty, which is you really have to know, once you know nature's wheelwork, the next thing you guys to know is how you fit in. And you really have to know the kind of the sovereignty competition you're in, and you have to know the players, and you have to know how to do that fight. And you can claim you have rights all day long, but if you have no power, you have no rights. So being a peacemaker is a position that requires wisdom and power. And it's a tough one, but people need to learn that. They need to learn their role in it. So I go into a lot of that on the website, because that's the other half of the education process. And those two sciences together, I think, will lift all the boats, that lift all tides. But going back to Malcolm's technology, what you're describing there on the clean water, that's part of the technology. If you look at Schauberger's technology, he wouldn't ever get into explosions and heat. But what he does is also has his technology will clean water, but there's a whole branch called geocell. Have you ever heard of geocell? So this is another one that Malcolm has. He has basically three technologies he's using there. So the Schauberger and implosion is one, but the geocell is basically a biomagnetic process where water is the dielectric, and you build up a magnet, but it's using water. And so, and we can talk more about the geocell, but a big thing that it does will clean water. It could be as polluted as you want. The whole pond could be polluted, and you put this process in there, and Schauberger shows it, and the geocell does as well. So that, I believe, that's actually very encouraging that he brought that up. And the source of the power, I think the oil in the oil business will be, there's plenty of materials and plastics that will need that. But from an energy generation standpoint, you really don't need that, because the water is acting as the interface to your tap, to the substratum, to the big sea of energy out there. So you really don't consume anything when you get this process right. So it's and then the other one is Stanley Meyer. Stanley Meyer had the water car. I don't know if you remember him.
I do.
So a lot of people think that it was electrolysis, but it's not electrolysis what he was doing. That's where you separate hydrogen and oxygen and water. What he was doing was the same thing that the geocell and the Schauberger was doing. Was he was using the water as an interface to the energy, to the building part of his tap. And so when they say a water fuel cell or water as a fuel, they're all kind of talking about that same approach, and it's very powerful. And the theosophists, Annie Besant and Ledbetter, they wrote a book called Occult Chemistry. And in there, this is late 1920s, 30s, where they finished it up. But they basically, using the city meditation process that they were taught, they wrote a whole book about how atoms work. This is back when atoms were just being described, or what a quote unquote atom is. But they were extremely accurate. And in that book called Occult Chemistry, when you read about how the hydrogen is built up and oxygen is built up, oxygen looks like a coil, like you would make a Tesla coil, for example. And so those atoms, those molecules are actually the interfaces, and they act like we would think of as capacitors and inductors, for example, but they're at the molecular level. And so, and then that occult chemistry builds up from something they call koilon. Everyone uses their own name, but it's basically the same as the substratum. And so if you just were to read occult chemistry and the geocell technology and some of the Stanley Meyer, you would get basically the recipe for both the energy, clean water, HVAC. It's a pretty powerful story there. So what I'm hoping to do is perhaps, help you dig down deeper where you want to, or anyone else out there, so that we get kind of an army of people digging into this with both the discipline and the ingenuity, both combined. And when you look at any of the old technologies with this new lens, with these new set of glasses, kind of like in the movie National Treasure, right? The Ben Franklin glasses, where you put the different colors down and you can see, oh, that's what they were saying. The science gives you that ability to see these technologies now with that backing, that confidence of, oh, there really is power there. I know where it is, and I know now how they're building that energy tap. So to me, that's the exciting part, is we can get there. And what you said about Malcolm, cleaning the water, that's very encouraging because it definitely has that capability. So I think he might have something there. I'm curious to see why he blended so many different techniques, but he must have had a reason.
We created this PowerPoint show, 234 slides, and then he went through 10 hours of meticulously going through each slide, explaining. And, I've been to help, create the slideshow. The lectures explaining the slides, I've only been through a few hours worth of those. But, again, I'm going to be going through that meticulously. He's left me with a lot of interesting stuff. A lot of stuff from related to Stanley Meyer's work, related to a couple of papers that Robert Oppenheimer worked before he got recruited to work on the bomb, because he was working along similar lines. I'm, on my own, I'm working through some of Schauberger's stuff. And then I've also got a bunch of papers by Ken Shoulders.
Yeah, Ken Shoulders was kind of the original there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got a whole collection of his papers, some published, some unpublished, that Malcolm was able to acquire and pass on to me, copies of, not originals, obviously, but copies. I haven't gone through any of that yet, other than just glancing through, the 20 or so odd papers that I've got, just to kind of see what's there. But so, yeah, I mean, that's going to be a major part of my studies over the next year. I'm going to continue with what I have been doing, which is, the sacred geometry in terms of its application of creating an infrastructure, using it to design a civilization. But it seems like coming up with the spatial representation of what our world could look like, and then having the technologies to bring that vision into reality, that's where I think all of this stuff starts coming together, because that's really, I guess you could say, what my long range goals were, is how do we use this now to learn how to live with each other and on this planet long term. I mean, we've seen so much change. I was commenting to my wife the other day, if you think about it, and I've made this point before, for most of humanity, the world that when you were old and ready to die, the world you were leaving wasn't that much different than the world you were born into. But I was, thinking about, well, geez, I was born in 1951, and I was telling somebody recently, I don't remember who, I was telling somebody about, yeah, well, here's how it was back then, how we used to do things and this and that. And they were pondering, it was somebody probably 30-ish or something, pondering, so you remember when you didn't even have television? I said, yes, I can remember when my dad brought home our first television, right? And we had no presence in space whatsoever, right? And then we just start going through, and I point out, well, when my grandfather was born, all of my grandparents were born, the primary mode of transportation in the world was foot or horseback or donkey, or cart, being drawn by donkeys or horses or whatever. But there was no mechanized. We were just at the very beginning, of course, in the 1890s. And electricity, alternating current electricity was just beginning to be utilized, but almost nobody had electricity. So, I mean, it was that 2 generations before me, which was 1890s. I'm born in mid 20th century. And then you think about, good Lord, how much things have changed in 120 years, 125 years, 130 years. It's almost hard to wrap your head around it. Well, now the question becomes, in my mind, is that pace of change going to continue, or is it going to reach a plateau where we stabilize at some level? And I don't know the answer to that, but I suspect that the long term of human civilization is going to and this is born out of my studies of repeated global catastrophes throughout the history of this planet, is that at some point or another, either we have to come to an understanding, a clear enough understanding of the nature of these catastrophes that we can actually prevent them, which I don't know if that's going to be possible. Like when we start talking about large scale volcanism, particularly, or, you know, what brings on an ice age. We still don't really know what can bring on. We thought we knew until dating showed us that what we thought happened in this length of time happened in this length of time. And so now we're like, wait a second, we got to rethink this here, right? Now, with the DART mission that just happened, well, yeah, you know, to me, the ultimate trigger of probably every kind of natural catastrophe you could have would be cosmic impacts. Well, we know that it's within our grasp to develop technology just using the laws of physics we already know, to, for example, divert an asteroid from making a direct collision with the Earth. Of course, in order for that to happen, it's necessary that we have a presence, an operational presence in space, which didn't exist when I was born. So we've come that far so that if we saw an asteroid making its elliptical orbit about the sun, and we were able to calculate that 10 years hence or 20 years hence or whatever, it was going to be on a direct collision with Earth, it would be now within our grasp to actually adapt and respond to that. In 1950, when I was 51, when I was born, no, we wouldn't have had that capability. We would have just been sitting ducks, you know, if we'd even discovered it until the last minute, you know. But here, I guess what I'm getting at is that somewhere in there, it seems like, and this is kind of what I've extracted from immersing myself into the ideas of going back to, you know, whether it was Atlantis or Hyperborea or the Garden of Eden, or that there was some natural state of natural and anthropogenic harmony. And something caused a disruption of that. And just like with the big earthquake in Turkey, you know, there's been dozens and dozens and dozens of aftershocks to that. Of course, they're diminishing in magnitude, but you know, actually the first shock wave was 7.8 on the Richter scale. It was followed like 8 hours later by a second shock wave, 7.6. So this was like a dual bam, bam, two-fisted catastrophe, right? But the thing is, I guess what I'm getting at is that it seems to me that ultimately maybe the purpose of human life, because life on this planet has been constantly reset, it would appear that the primary mechanism for these great biological planetary resets is cosmic. I'm more inclined towards impacts of asteroids and comets, but also I think we're probably living in a solar system with a sun that's much more dynamic. And would you probably concur with that, right, Dan, that it's likely that the sun is more dynamic than has been recognized over the last century?
Yeah, coronal mass ejections and the switching of the polars axis, I think both of those as cataclysms. And I think it's like you said, it's not about scarcity, which is what we're programmed, but it's more about abundance. People need to understand that, but you need the propulsion as well to get off the rock. If you really want your civilization, let's say you go back 100 million years, the ones that I think have advanced are the ones that could get off the rock during the catastrophic event and then come back.
Yes.
I think there's a lot for that.
As pregnant as that idea is with implications, and as bizarro and science fiction as it sounds, it seems to me that it's actually quite plausible.
Yeah, once you understand the science, you'll know that the propulsion's there and the energy's there to do it. It's not based on what we're told is the art of the possible. And once you allow for that, then that's the point where I just lost 100 years. I mean, we've known this for a while, and we haven't been working on the things, at least, you know, I'm not aware of them, that get us off the rock and in a large scale way, so the civilization can exist beyond these interruptions that are local to the earth. And so that gets into some wild ideas. I know it's hard for people to wrap their heads around it, but once you understand that there were catastrophe cycles and that there were advanced civilizations, and you start just kind of playing with that in your mind, doing the critical thinking you're talking about, there's just some logical conclusions there. And you really just get excited about, okay, well, we are where we are, but it's pretty exciting because I think we can very quickly ramp up our capabilities. Like you were saying, the pace of change can change dramatically once these ideas are mainstreamed again. And I think that's what some people are afraid of, who kind of like the way it is now. I think we just need to collectively ramp up, get smart, know who the powers that be are currently, know about nature's wheelwork. And when you know how to defend yourself and you know how to harmonize with nature, both mind and machinery, there's a lot that's possible there. And the ingenuity, I call it sparking ingenuity, but to me, that's really what I'm about, is driving towards that future you're talking about. I think it's very doable.
Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't, what's the point? I mean, we might as well just go and get drunk, or whatever else we want to use to distract ourselves.
Right. Yeah. I mean, which is the mode that they'd like everybody to stay in. But that's what's so exciting about this year, I think, is that I really see a chance to break out, and it's powerful messages, and your voice reaches a lot of people. And, if we can get it out there, we can put this story together with a lot of credibility. And, the strategy needs to be get it out there wide and fast, and get people excited. Yeah. So I'm all for that. So if I can help that, I'm in.
Well, I think we're all pretty much on the same page with this, and we've all kind of, which to me is powerful and inspiring, is that we've kind of all followed these individual pathways, but we're all converged. All these pathways are all kind of like converging in this clearing now within the forest, and we can kind of see the bigger perspective here and what lies before us. We've been, at least for me, I feel like a lot of it, I've been like macheting my way through the underbrush and the thorns, and seeing only 3 feet in front of me, but I'm keep going. And now it's like, yeah, we're beginning to get into the clearing, and I see, hey, there's you guys.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. Exactly. And it's been a knife fight, and you feel like you're alone, but then when you reach out and you find out some other people have already arrived there, and you add those pieces together, it's a powerful position to be in. Like I said, I'm excited.
Me too.
It's a great way to describe it. It's a good vision. Yeah, I mean, our flashlights just got a lot brighter, so we're going to shine a light on this.
I think, well, we need to, and I think all the signs are showing that really it is now time to shine light on this and to get it out there. If ever the signals were loud and clear coming in, I think they are now.
And I think we have some top cover. It may not be obvious, and there's a lot of things in the news, and it's designed to make you fearful, but there's also some good people working there too, that we got to trust they're going to get their jobs done too. And our job is to carry this message out. And when you put that two together, I think there's a real chance.
Well, I'm optimistic. I have to be. Otherwise it all becomes futile and pointless, and I'm not interested at all in going there. So
Robert and I are your top cover.
Oh, that's
We got
relief
Yeah.
to know that.
Oh, now I'm worried. It's good stuff. Yeah.
All right. Well, it's good stuff, man. And let's keep refining our presentations right up until we get out there in April. And
yeah, I offered up to, when Darren and Robert were on, to, if there's a small group that want to kind of go through the science piece and want to spin up, I can do sessions with them. I can get on Mike Adams and explain this too, if that's another route to kind of build up momentum and get the word out. So those are some of the things I could do. I'd love to see the charts that you're working on, and provide feedback and just get that in my noggin as well.
Well,
and
I
add
should
to
give
that.
you a copy of the PowerPoint show.
Yeah, I'd love to
Let's
see that.
Um,
And then Darren, one thing I was thinking about, you said you had visited my site, but I wanted to go through and point you to some of the resources. A big part of it, it's not, maybe not obvious in there, but if you sign up, and it's all free, you don't charge anything, but a lot of resources on some of like the Monroe Institute we were talking about, and that disclosure of all kinds. So a lot of information there. If you wanted to walk through, I could do that with you too.
Okay, sure.
now, Dan, do you know Sean Webb?
No?
He's, what would I don't, is that his training? He's written a few books. He's got a podcast, and he is consulting or actually working with the Monroe Institute. I'm trying to remember, but yeah, somehow he's affiliated with the Monroe Institute. And he's a good man. He'd be one that we would bring into the core team, I think. Along with a number of other people that I work with and know. But maybe I like your idea. Maybe we could do a couple of sessions, and I could get a few people like Brad Young, and I think your idea of getting on Mike Adams is great. And he really made it clear that he wants to work with us.
He would be a quick study, I'm sure. Yeah, with his background and faster than light technologies.
Yeah, he would be.
And he's local here. It'd be easy.
Yeah, he's right there in Austin.
Yeah. And so I got a tour of the facility there, and I came away very impressed with what he's put together.
Yeah, maybe if we just kind of brainstorm a little bit, if you have ideas, I'm willing to support it. I think now is the time. And, if we can organize and get some of these people and connect some of this and tighten it up, our story a little bit, and just kind of fill out some of the details. I think it's there. You just, especially when you put all these minds together, something's good is going to happen, I think.
So Darren and Robert, could you facilitate that? Like, if maybe have a couple of sessions where Dan, we could get a 3 or 4, however many, but meet. Dan could walk us through this stuff.
That'd be cool.
That would be very cool.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that. Yep.
I mean, look, it looks way interesting enough that I'm sitting here by myself, fascinated going through it. But if we were doing it in that context with Dan actually taking us through it, explaining it, that would be even an order of magnitude better.
Yeah. We can make that happen for sure.
All right.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Glad we got to speak, Randall. That's good.
Yeah, likewise, Dan.
It's
It's been good every time so far.
Just waiting for me to disappoint you. Won't happen. Won't happen.
No, man, as I find out more about you, when you start talking about sovereignty and that, and I realize, well, okay, here's a guy who also gets the geopolitics of where we're at.
You have to. Yeah,
really,
you can't go. That's like going, to a knife fight. You just can't go into that. You have to know those guys. And we know them. We know what it's about. We know what they're doing. And there's people helping out. So
good. Well, I like hearing that. But
I'll take some positivity too.
Always been I've been for a long time, always in conjunction with all this, just a big advocate of freedom, individual freedom, liberty, the original American vision. And so that's, to me, a very important part of all of this is people rediscovering their sovereignty, and realizing that they are their own best authority. They are their own best teacher. And kind of start moving away from this idea that we've got this cult of experts that just have a monopoly on reality, and whatever they say, that's it. We don't have to think about it. It just alleviates us from the responsibility of having to think through things for ourselves. And because of that, people are just becoming more intellectually lazy, more susceptible to propaganda and half-truths and gaslighting and all the rest of the shit that's contaminating our world out there intellectually and emotionally and psychologically. And I think what we're doing is really the antidote to that.
Yeah, it fits into your approach of what you think, I don't want to call it schooling, but education, how people should learn. It goes hand in hand with that. You have to take responsibility for yourself, and the immersive and, the multi-generations approach you're talking about, and getting out there in the hands-on. We need more of that. And there's a lot of schools popping up around here, just around me in the West Austin area. And they're starting whole schools with their kids and doing just what you're talking about. And it's very impressive. These are pretty high powered, capable people, and their kids just are turning into these kind of superhero kids that just think and do and are kind and compassionate. And it's just beautiful to watch.
I love hearing that. I really do.
Yeah. So, and I'm going to build curriculums for that kind of school too, so that we can come in there and lay this on them, and the homeschoolers, that we just give them packages of things they would never get anywhere else, but
Right.
experiments to go with it and the whole thing. So,
well, that's going to be a big part of our conversation going forward, is how we can manifest this on a higher level, where we can get something to counter this, what's happened with, public education, which is really, I say public education because to me it's not public education, it's government indoctrination.
right.
And that's really all it is at this point. Any education that goes on is just secondary to the overriding goal. So
Yeah, we have a lot of
countering
common
that-
interests, I think.
Yep.
Appreciate the call, and I know
Oh,
you
I
gotta-
do too, man.
You got to go, but I'm looking forward to, keeping it up. Let me know what you guys want to do. I'll help support it. So
All right.
good stuff.
Good stuff. Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of potential here for where this thing could go. So
Yep.
I think it's wide open.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Robert, I'll let you organize the next one. So
Okay.
you and Darren, if you get something together, have some ideas, just let me know.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
All right,
Sounds good.
guys.
Thanks, guys.
Good
Have a
night.
good evening.
Guys.
All right.
Good night.
everybody.
Have a good night.